A poor street cleaner boy is just doing his job, wiping roads early morning. A luxury car comes flying by and splashes muddy water all over him. Inside, a smug, arrogant rich man who laughs and doesn't even glance back. But what he doesn't know is someone is watching. Someone powerful. Someone who knows this boy. And by nightfall, this rich man's world is about to be turned upside down. Reputation? Gone. Power? Shaken. Because kindness can echo and cruelty echoes louder. Before starting the story, make sure to subscribe the channel so that you don't miss any update in future. The boy was just 12. Shoes torn at the soles. Fingers red from scrubbing pavement. His breath visible in the cold morning air, but he still smiled, wiping each patch of road like he was polishing diamonds. It was his mother's birthday. He had saved up for a single rose. And in his tiny pocket, wrapped in paper, was a chocolate she hadn't tasted in years. A loud roar cut through the quiet street, a black luxury car speeding down the lane like the driver owned the world. And just as the boy leaned forward to clean the last puddle, splash. Mud. Cold, thick, reeking street mud all over his face. His smile disappeared. The car didn't stop. Didn't slow down. From inside, a man in a pristine suit glanced back through his tinted window, smirked, and turned up the radio. The boy didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stood there, dripping, clutching the now-soaked rose in one hand and a ruined piece of chocolate in the other. But what the man didn't know, someone had watched it all. Someone who knew the boy's name. And that was his first mistake. From the top floor of the marble building across the street, the man stood still, coffee in hand, eyes locked on the scene below. He had no nameplate on his door. No flashy watches or gold rings. But in this city, when he spoke, people listened. And when he moved, power followed. He had been watching the boy for weeks now. Not because he was nosy, but because there was something about that kid. The way he worked with quiet pride. How he smiled even when the world was unkind. How he gave respect in a place that had forgotten the word. And now, he had just seen that smile, crushed. By a man he knew all too well. Raza Malik. Real estate mogul. Media darling. The kind of man who lit cigars with other people's dignity. He owned towers, cars, judges, maybe even elections. And he had just drenched a child in filth and laughed. The man behind the glass took a slow sip of coffee, then placed the cup down with care. His eyes didn't blink. "You chose the wrong morning to be a monster," he whispered to the window. He turned, pulled out a phone, and tapped a name. A quiet voice answered, "Sir." The man said just 4 words. "Find me that boy." And in that moment, the wheels began to turn. Not for revenge. For something much bigger. Because when good people break, sometimes the city breaks with them. The boy didn't go home. Not yet. His shirt stuck to his back, soaked in dirty water. His fingers trembled, not from cold, but from something heavier. That rose, ruined. The chocolate? Melted into the wrapper like it never existed. Like it was mocking his hope. He sat by the curb, staring at the muddy puddle where his gift had died. People walked past him, some glanced, most didn't. But then, something odd. A man in a suit, not flashy, not loud, approached him slowly. He didn't speak at first. Just crouched beside him and placed a fresh napkin in his hand. The boy looked up, wary, unsure. The man smiled gently and said, "He shouldn't have done that to you." The boy didn't respond. His jaw tightened, but his eyes, they held a silent storm. The man sat beside him, ignoring the dirt. "What's your name?" he asked. The boy hesitated. "Aman." "Aman," the man repeated softly, as if testing its weight. "A strong name. You know what it means." Aman shook his head. "It means peace." There was silence. Then, the man reached into his coat and pulled out a small white envelope. On it, a simple note. "For your mother. Tell her happy birthday from someone who still believes in good people." Aman looked at it like it was a trick. But when he opened it, his eyes widened. Not because of the money inside, but because tucked in with the bills was a brand new rose. Fresh, untouched, with no mud on its petals. The boy looked up, but the man was already walking away, disappearing into the city like he was never there. But behind that simple gift was a plan already in motion. Because this wasn't just kindness. It was the beginning of a lesson. And Raza Malik was about to learn it the hard way. In a city where noise ruled everything, car horns, shouting vendors, the endless thrum of ambition, there were still corners where power moved in silence. And one of those corners was an office with no logo, no receptionist, and a door that only opened inward. Inside, that same man, the one who gave Aman the rose, stood by a massive digital wall filled with names, photos, maps. Surveillance feeds blinked. Data streamed. But in the center of it all was a paused image. A boy, soaked, eyes full of quiet fire. He stared at the screen like a chessboard, placing no piece without intention. Around him, his team waited. Former intelligence officers, cyber specialists, men and women who used to move nations from behind curtains. He pointed at the image of Raza Malik. Destroying his reputation won't be enough, he said. He has to feel what that boy felt. One of the team members, a woman in a leather jacket, leaned forward. You want exposure or collapse? The man didn't blink. I want truth, dressed in pain. Files were pulled. Hidden dealings, offshore accounts, videos, audio leaks. Everything Raza thought was buried, this room had already unearthed. But the man wasn't smiling. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about message, memory, what we let people in power get away with, and how that ends today. Because the city had forgotten. It had forgotten what it meant to be watched by those with nothing to lose. And this time, it wasn't justice knocking. It was consequence. While plans brewed in secret boardrooms and files changed hands like weapons, Aman was just trying to make it through the day. His world wasn't strategy and surveillance. It was cracked sidewalks and cheap soap, plastic buckets, second-hand uniforms, and a mother who coughed too often but smiled too easily. She didn't know about the incident. He didn't tell her. He just handed her the envelope, watching as her eyes widened, her hands shaking when she saw the crisp notes and the fresh rose. She looked at him confused, concerned. Aman, where did this come from? He smiled. From someone who still believes in good people. She didn't ask more. She just hugged him tightly, like she knew he needed it. But that night, as Aman lay awake on the floor mattress beside a flickering fan, he stared at the ceiling, replaying the splash. The laughter. That car. That man. And for the first time in his young life, something inside him refused to stay silent. He didn't know how power worked. He didn't know about the man behind the glass. But he knew what dignity felt like. And he knew someone had tried to rip it from him. He wasn't angry. Not in the way people screamed and punched walls. He was the other kind of angry. The quiet kind. The dangerous kind. The kind that remembers. Raza Malik didn't lose sleep over puddles. That morning, as headlines buzzed with fluff about his charity gala and new skyscraper deal, he sat in his luxury penthouse, sipping imported tea like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't humiliated a child the day before. Like he hadn't made someone's worst day into a public joke. In his world, humiliation wasn't a mistake, it was power. And power, for Raza, was a suit tailored in arrogance and stitched with impunity. He scrolled through his phone, barely reading the articles written about him. All praise, all hollow. Every photo carefully curated. Every news outlet paid off or afraid to ask the wrong questions. His assistant entered, whispering something about a delayed meeting. He waved it off. They'll wait. They always do. But just as she turned to leave, his phone buzzed with a notification that wasn't supposed to exist. A new account. No followers. No profile picture. Just a short video. Raza clicked it, and there it was. Him. In that car. That moment. Slowed down. Zoomed in. The splash. The boy. His laughter. But what chilled him wasn't the video, it was the caption. "You are not as invisible as you think. Watch." His jaw clenched. No hashtags. No sender. No link. Just that line. Just that watchful voice behind the screen. Suddenly, his tea didn't taste right. Suddenly, the silence in his suite wasn't peaceful, it was loud. For the first time in years, Raza Malik felt something alien crawl up his spine. Doubt. At 2:13 a.m., when the city was asleep and the elite were safely hidden behind private gates and blacked-out windows, an email slipped into the inboxes of 6 independent journalists. No sender. No subject. Just a file attached. It was named simply, Facade, Zip. Inside were photographs. Not of scandals or secret affairs, but of contracts. Illegal land grabs. Forged documents. Bribes wrapped in donations. All tied to Raza Malik Holdings. One of the journalists, a woman who'd been silenced too many times before, clicked open the last file. A scanned letter, with Raza's signature, authorizing a development project that bulldozed an orphanage. The same orphanage he'd once posed in front of for a charity campaign. Her hands trembled, not from fear, from rage. "They think no one sees this," she whispered to herself. But someone did. Someone who wasn't just watching. Someone who was unleashing. That morning, while Raza prepped for a board meeting, tweets began to surface. Small at first. A few hundred shares. A couple of anonymous accounts asking questions. But the tone was sharp. The evidence, undeniable. And most importantly, the people weren't ignoring it. Across the city, whispers became murmurs. "Have you seen the leak? Is that Raza Malik? How deep does this go?" The mask was cracking. And the man who once bathed in applause now walked into his office greeted not by admiration, but by eyes filled with suspicion. Because once truth finds oxygen, it spreads like fire. By the time Raza Malik entered the boardroom that afternoon, the air had changed. Not a single chair creaked. Not a single throat cleared. Just stiff backs, tight lips, and a silence sharp enough to slice through ego. His executives, the same men who used to laugh a little too loud at his jokes, now avoided his eyes. No one offered coffee. No one asked about his golf weekend. The unspoken truth sat at the head of the table before he did. He adjusted his tie, casually, but his fingers were damp. "Let's begin," he said. Screens lit up. Charts. Projections. Budgets. All dressed to impress. But then came the bomb. A slide, not from the agenda, appeared. Raza's face. Mid-laugh. Mid-splash. The room froze. A voice, calm and cutting, spoke from the end of the table. "Raza, care to explain this clip that's been circulating since morning?" He blinked. Swallowed. "A smear campaign. Taken out of context." Another voice, "So are the leaked contracts fake too?" Then another, "And the offshore accounts?" The charity fund discrepancies. Questions came like bullets now, fast, cold, and impossible to dodge. His voice cracked once, then twice. He stood up, tried to take control, but the room didn't bend like it used to. Power had shifted, and Raza could feel it. Because the truth wasn't just out. It was multiplying. And in a world where image was everything, the king of glass towers suddenly looked very, very breakable. The city didn't sleep, it buzzed. From the neon-lit streets to the cramped tea stalls, from office cubicles to rooftop apartments, the whispers grew louder. "Did you hear about Raza Malik? Yeah, that video, the boy. Can someone so rich really get away with this?" Screens and cafes replayed the splash. Social feeds exploded with debates. Hashtags trended expose Malik, justice for Aman, rich and ruthless. But it wasn't just noise. It was movement. Workers refused to step into Raza's projects. Investors pulled back quietly. Even politicians, once eager to shake his hand, suddenly found excuses to cancel meetings. And somewhere, in the heart of the city's chaos, Aman watched. Not from the shadows this time, but with a spark growing fierce and clear. Because what started as mud thrown in anger was now a tidal wave threatening to drown the mighty. The boy who was once invisible was becoming a symbol. A voice. And this voice wasn't fading. Raza Malik's penthouse, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Phones buzzed nonstop, calls from lawyers, angry investors, even distant relatives looking for favors. He paced the marble floors, each step heavier than the last. The video had shattered his carefully built world, and the leak had become a wildfire. He didn't just lose face, he lost control. Behind the polished smile, a storm was raging. His closest allies whispered doubts, and his enemies smelled blood. The security team tightened their patrols, watching every visitor with suspicion. Paranoia seeped into every corner of his life. He started questioning his own staff, who was loyal and who was a traitor. Meanwhile, Amon's name was everywhere, a symbol of truth against the corrupt elite. But Amon was no hero yet. He was just a boy carrying a weight far too heavy. Every night, the memories replayed in his mind, the mud, the laughter, the cold stare of Raza Malik. He knew the fight wasn't just about dignity anymore, it was about survival. Raza, on the other hand, was plotting his next move, desperate to silence the storm. Bribery offers were sent in secret, threats whispered in the dark. But Amon's story had already ignited a spark in the city's soul. The battle lines were drawn not just in boardrooms or social media, but in the hearts of every ordinary person watching. And as the night deepened, one thing was clear: this war had only just begun. Just when Raza thought the walls were closing in, an unexpected call shattered the silence. It was from someone nobody saw coming, Zara, a senior executive from inside Raza's own company. She'd been quiet, watching, calculating. For years, she had been the silent observer of corruption masked by fancy suits. But Zara wasn't here to protect Raza. She wanted change. And she had evidence, receipts, emails, recordings that could blow the scandal wide open. Her voice was steady but firm. "You want to clean this mess? Or are you going down with it?" she asked. Raza, desperate and cornered, hesitated. Trust was a currency he couldn't afford to waste. But Zara's offer was a lifeline or a trap. Meanwhile, Amon got a mysterious message, a warning from someone close to Raza's inner circle. The game had become deeper, darker. Allies could be enemies. Enemies could be allies. In this deadly chess match, every move counted. Zara held the power to either save or shatter Raza's empire. And both sides knew it. But would she choose justice or self-preservation? The tension thickened, and the city waited with bated breath. Because the next chapter could change everything. As Zara's call rippled through the shadows of Raza's empire, another force quietly stirred, the city's underground network of truth seekers. They were bloggers, whistleblowers, and everyday citizens armed with smartphones and relentless curiosity. No flashy suits, no boardroom power. Just raw, unfiltered voices determined to break the silence. Soon, encrypted messages began spreading like wildfire, pointing to deeper secrets buried beneath Malik's surface. Leaks, eyewitness accounts, financial trails, all feeding the growing storm. Amon's story became the spark for this digital rebellion. Suddenly, everyone had a part to play. Social media wasn't just a platform, it was a battlefield. Memes, hashtags, and viral clips piled up, forcing even the most loyal supporters to question what they'd believed. Raza's PR team scrambled to contain the damage, spinning tales and firing denials. But the truth was too loud. Even allies started whispering doubts behind closed doors. The city's pulse quickened. It was no longer about one man or one scandal. It was about exposing a system built on lies. And the people, fueled by anger and hope, refused to be silenced. The underground network had become the city's heartbeat, raw, relentless, unstoppable. And Raza's world was crumbling beneath their feet. The tide had turned. The pressure was no longer just outside the glass walls. It was inside, eating away at Raza Malik's sanity. Meetings became battles. Every glance felt like an accusation. His empire, once untouchable, was now riddled with cracks. Reports leaked faster than his damage control teams could react. Investors pulled out overnight. Employees whispered in hallways, their loyalty hanging by a thread. Raza tried to hold it together, forcing smiles that didn't reach his eyes. But the weight was crushing. His phone buzzed with messages from lawyers warning him to settle. The board demanded answers. His reputation? Shattered. Even his closest friends started to distance themselves. Meanwhile, Amon's story became the anthem of the city's frustrated youth. People rallied behind him, sharing their own stories of injustice. The divide grew, the mighty struggling to maintain their grip while the streets roared for change. Raza knew this was his breaking point. One wrong move, and everything would collapse. He was no longer just fighting for his business. He was fighting for survival. And survival in this game meant sacrifice. Raza knew words alone wouldn't save him anymore. He needed action, fast, ruthless, and invisible. Late at night, plans were drawn in dark rooms. A shadowy figure was sent to find Amon. Not to negotiate, to intimidate. Amon's phone buzzed with cryptic messages, veiled threats masked as warnings. Back off, or face consequences. But fear wasn't in Amon's blood. Instead, it fueled a fire deeper than ever. His family grew anxious, sensing the danger creeping closer. Friends urged him to stay quiet, to disappear. But silence was surrender, and surrender was not an option. Raza's empire had weapons beyond money, influence, connections, and fear. And now that fear was being wielded like a blade. The city held its breath. Who would blink first? Would Amon back down, or would the silent threat push him further into the fight? The stakes weren't just high, they were deadly. And the game was far from over. Just when it seemed like darkness was closing in, a spark of hope appeared. Zara, the insider who once played it safe, decided to go public. She handed over damning evidence to trusted journalists, documents, recordings, everything. Her bravery sent shockwaves through the city. Suddenly, the media frenzy exploded. Headlines screamed about corruption, betrayal, and the fall of a titan. The public, hungry for justice, rallied harder behind Amon's story. Raza's carefully spun web began to unravel faster than anyone expected. Even some of his closest allies jumped ship, desperate to save themselves. The balance of power shifted. It was no longer just a battle of words, it was a fight for the city's soul. Amon, once just a victim, became a symbol of resilience. People saw in him the courage they wished they had. This turning point wasn't just about exposing one man, it was about challenging an entire system. Raza realized the stakes had changed. No more whispers in dark rooms. The war was out in the open, and there was no turning back. The city's heartbeat quickened. And with every passing moment, the fight grew fiercer. The city woke up to chaos. The scandal wasn't just news anymore, it was a wildfire spreading through every corner. Banks froze assets. Partners severed ties overnight. Raza's empire, built on glitz and glamour, was crumbling in real time. Social media exploded with debates, memes, and calls for justice. Amon's inbox flooded with messages of support, from strangers to activists. But with every victory came a cost. The pressure on Amon's family skyrocketed. Threats didn't stop. Late-night knocks, suspicious cars, the invisible chains tightening. Meanwhile, Raza retreated behind walls of lawyers and silence. But the silence was deafening. His legacy was unraveling faster than any spin doctor could fix. Even his own reflection seemed like a stranger. This was no longer a simple battle, it was a war with no clear end. The city watched, divided and desperate for resolution. The rich man who once splashed mud had become the mud itself. And Amon? He was no longer just a cleaner boy. He was the voice of a movement. A storm was coming. Just when the fight seemed too heavy for Amon to carry alone, help arrived from the most unexpected corner. A former rival of Raza's, a powerful businesswoman named Nadia, stepped into the light. She'd been watching from the sidelines, waiting for the right moment. With her own empire threatened by Raza's greed, Nadia saw an opportunity to tip the scales. She reached out to Aman with an offer of resources, protection, and a platform to amplify his voice. At first, Aman was skeptical. Why would someone so powerful risk it all for him? But Nadia's sincerity was undeniable. Her team began digging deeper, uncovering layers of corruption even Raza hadn't imagined. Together, they formed an alliance that shook the city's elite to its core. Suddenly, the battle wasn't just about exposure, it was about dismantling a corrupt system piece by piece. The city's hope reignited. Aman wasn't alone anymore. The underdog had found a champion. And with every step forward, Raza's grip weakened. This was no longer a fight for survival, it was a fight for justice. And justice was on their side. The final act was set. Raza Malik, once untouchable, now faced the storm he had tried to bury. Courtrooms buzzed with anticipation. The evidence Nadia and Aman brought was airtight, no spin, no loopholes. Public outrage fueled every hearing. The city demanded justice, and this time, it wouldn't be ignored. Raza's empire collapsed like a house of cards. His allies turned witnesses. The man who splashed mud on a cleaner boy was now drowning in his own filth. Aman stood tall not as a victim, but as a victor. His courage inspired thousands, changing lives beyond the courtroom. The city breathed a sigh of relief, but everyone knew this was more than one man's fall. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that even the smallest voices could shake giants. And in the end, justice wasn't about power, it was about truth. The cleaner boy had cleaned the city's conscience, and from the mud, a new dawn was born. True strength isn't measured by wealth or power, it's found in courage, resilience, and standing up for what's right. Even the smallest voice can shake the biggest empire when fueled by truth and justice. Never underestimate the power of one determined soul to spark a revolution.